Greetings, everybody. We'll get started at 11:02 as people are hopping in from our other meetings, and welcome. All right, so welcome, everybody. My name is John Jordy. I am the Instructional Assessment Coordinator at the University of Florida, and I'm facilitating these generative AI principal discussions hosted by Unizen and our wonderful colleagues at the Faculty Development Subcommittee. So I first wanted to start with an introduction to Bart to give us a little bit of background on Unizen, and then we'll get started into the panel. So Bart, I'll leave it to you to take it away and give an overview of Unizen.
Great. Thank you, John. For those that don't know me, my name is Bart Purcell. I'm the CEO here at Unizen. And I just want to give everyone a quick overview of what we think of the four value propositions here at Unizen. And I just remembered we'll have to update this slide because we now have 16 members here at Unizen. We recently added NYU and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So welcome if some folks from those institutions happen to be joining today. So the four areas, we'll start with student affordability. Unizen offers our members an inclusive access program. So this is a program in which faculty members can have their students procure e-textbooks and/or courseware at a lower discounted rate through Unizen. That program started in 2017, and we estimate since the program's inception, we saved students $124 million in their courseware and content programs. So we feel really proud about that, helping students keep things as affordable as we can in their higher education journeys. The second value proposition here is what we call the Unizen Data Platform, or UDP. We're really good at acronyms, so I apologize if I start to say UDP when I talk about the data platform. So this is a platform that brings together members' data, specifically their student information system data and their learning management system data. But we're also starting to add additional EdTech tool data into the Unizen Data Platform. I was crunching some numbers for a 2024 report, and I think in 2024, our members ran over 4 million queries across all of the Unizen data platforms, and we saw data emitted from 19 different environments into the UDP across our memberships. That's really exciting. We also try and help our members manage EdTech supplier costs. So we have agreements with 13 EdTech providers that gives our members advantageous pricing, and also many of those agreements deal with data delivery back to the Unizen data platform from those environments. And again, looking back at 2024, on average, a Unizen member recouped about 76% of their Unizen membership dues through our contract savings. So it's great to be able to try and keep things affordable. And the fourth value stream is, John mentioned it earlier, our communities. So yeah, you can go ahead and flip to the next one, John. We have what we call our Teaching and Learning Advisory Group. This is really an umbrella group that a lot of different subgroups are sort of underneath this umbrella. We have groups where accessibility experts come together monthly across Unizen. We have application development group. We have a group for the administration of learning tools, so Canvas administrators, Brightspace administrators, those kind of folks. We have an affordable content group that spends a lot of time looking at OER, a learning analytics group, and an eText community of practice for the folks that manage our inclusive access program across the consortium. And the final one we have, and John will probably talk more about this here in a minute, is the faculty development subcommunity as well. So John, I will hand it over to you.
So thanks, Bart. And I put the information to these groups in the chat. So please feel free, and I can bring this over real quick. So here's the information. Our faculty development subcommittee. It has our meeting agendas, our subcommittee Google Drive folders. You can email the group, contact the group chairs. So please feel free if you haven't already. Again, you can look at all the different subcommittees and join. As Bart mentioned, we have a bunch of awesome subcommittees for accessibility, affordable content, eText, and here's our FacDev one, learning analytics. So if you're interested, or you and your colleagues are interested, please feel free to share those links and we can get you added into those groups. And because we really value that development amongst each other. And so for myself and my awesome colleague, Christina from Rutgers, we are co-chairs of the Faculty Development Subcommittee. And really our main purpose is to provide folks that are in our areas of expertise, whether it's in our Center for Teaching Excellence, whether it's instructional designers or other support staff. We're trying to outline some actionable resources for us. So when we meet monthly, we're meeting Friday. So if you would like to join us, feel free to join us at our Friday meeting, or send again that invite to your colleagues at your institution. So one of the things that we've done is this exact thing, which is this, we identified some concern amongst our peers that our faculty are really struggling with what to do with the rise of AI in the classroom. So what we did was we set aside some time to look at some principles and outline some principles around the use of generative AI in the classroom. Another thing that we did was a stepping stones initiative, was looking at faculty development curriculum for learning analytics. And again, outlining some steps, some ways in which we can develop workshops or workshop materials for our fac dev groups at our respective institutions that we can then bring forward to our faculty at how we do things at our institution. So again, what we really try and do is outline some awesome ways in which we can support each other and see what's going on at our institutions, and really be at the forefront of updating our workshops, updating our support materials, and really making sure our faculty members are aware of what's going on. So if you have not done so, feel free to join our group. So today's agenda is we're going to do a quick welcome and introduction. I'm going to talk about the actual guiding principles. Then we'll get directly to our panel discussions. So please feel free throughout this session to add any questions, raise your hand. And this is, again, a conversation that we like to have. And so please feel free to add any of your questions, comments, thoughts in the chat throughout the session. And if you have any questions or want any of our panelists to follow up on anything, please feel free to do that as well throughout the session. So as I mentioned, my name is John Jordy. I'm at the University of Florida. I'm an instructional assessment coordinator. I really am involved in helping faculty out with data and analytics, along with their teaching evaluations. And I'll move it over to Nicholas. Nicholas.
Perfect. Hey, good morning, everyone. So very quick, my name is Nicholas Mathis. I am calling you from London today. I am the Chief Product Officer at Anthology. For those of you that are not familiar with Anthology, some of the products that we provide to institutions include things like our learning management system, Blackboard, a student information system, student and our CRM Reach as well. I'll be bringing a little bit of a different angle to the conversation, I think. So I'm not an educator myself, although I come from a family of educators, but I kind of come more from a product and technical perspective. My background is in AI, and I've also been very deeply involved in the rollout of some of the AI capabilities that we've built out, for example, inside of Blackboard. And through that, I've been exposed to kind of a global community of educators. So I think there's some really interesting things that have come out of that. Last thing that I'll just say, I've also got a particular interest in accessibility. So I was one of the original founders of the tool called Ally, which I believe many of you are using at your institutions. I'm also a member of the UK All-Party Parliamentary Working Group on Assistive Technology. So that connection between accessibility and AI is a really interesting one for me.
Thank you, Nicholas. Astrid?
Good morning. My name is Astrid Reed, and I'm speaking to you from Southern California. I am at the University of California, Irvine. I am the Compass Community Practice Manager there. Our Compass initiative is built around data-driven decision-making, and we now incorporate all areas of campus in our Compass initiative, and are very excited at the different things that we're able to achieve, because we're really breaking down those walls in the siloed system of academia. I am on the leadership committee of the Unison group, and I'm also on the steering committee of the EDUCAUSE Student Success Analytics Community Group. And I have been studying change management especially in large nonprofits for a long time. So this time period for me is super exciting because all of my education, all of my experience, all of my passions are perfect for right now. So it's a fun time for me, helping bring people awareness of the areas that they need to think about, planting those seeds, but also the excitement of all that we're getting to experience right now.
Awesome. Thank you, Astrid. Sharon?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sharon Storger, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Programs and Assessment in the School of Communication and Information at Rutgers University, and we're situated in the New Brunswick, New Jersey campus area. I work primarily with instructors and help them create positive and very robust experiences for their students in the classroom, and that classroom can be in person or online. I also teach, trying to sort of practice what I preach and what I suggest to my instructors. So I do teach for the Master of Information program, and this semester I'm teaching asynchronous and online, which is presenting challenges to many of us, especially in the age of AI. Another hat that I wear is I'm also an academic integrity facilitator for our school. So not only am I working with faculty to try to make their assignments and their activities AI robust, or some would love AI resistant, but that's sort of like a moving target on many days. I also have to work with them and their students on misuse of AI in the classroom. So that also presents some interesting challenges and points that I'm sure will come up in our conversation today. So I'm glad to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody. So as I mentioned, I'm the co-chair of the Faculty Development Subcommittee, and we started this process well over a year ago, where the subcommittee identified some topics that we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into, and knew some of our institutions and our faculty needed additional support. So as many of you know, the impact of AI, especially over the last couple of years when it really came to being with ChatGPT in 2022, this really led to a lot of faculty members struggling with understanding the policy at our respective institutions, how to draft those policies, the real world implications of the use of AI for our students. And so we set about creating a list of guiding principles around the use of AI, particularly focusing on the impact of teaching and learning, as that's really our area of expertise. So over this month and then next month, we'll have Principle 5, and then we'll be in the works on drafting Principle 6. We'll be hosting these panel discussions, so please feel free to look out for those invites for Principle 5 and 6 coming up. So as I put in here, and I'm going to put the actual principles in the chat, we're going to look at Principle 4 today, which is generative AI should foster equity and ensure accessibility for all learners. So this is really, really important. And one of the things that we hear a lot more about than a lot of the principles that we even looked at here about educational relevance. Instructors need to be transparent, but the fostering equity and accessibility is really, really important. As many of us know, these tools aren't free, all right? So many of these, especially, have a significant cost to them, whether it's at your institution is paying quite a bit for access to these systems, or the latest updates to those systems. Like we have access to certain models, but not access to all the latest models. And as many of you probably saw yesterday, it was trending on Twitter, that ChatGPT just released a new version that had the ability to update their pictures and what it generates. I tested out this morning, wasn't too impressed with one of the options, because I always test it out with show me the life cycle of a frog and all the labels that it does, and it still had a bunch of errors in it, and had different things in it that was labeled incorrectly. So I know it's still got a ways to go. But these things are updating constantly, right? There's a new model coming out, every few weeks. So we know that it is only going to get better, all right? But for most of us, there's still a cost associated with accessing those higher up models that are able to do things differently. So another thing to consider here is looking at how these models are actually trained. So what information, what data sets were these models trained on? How do we ensure the accessibility of each of these models, whether it's the access to them or the actual accessibility of them? So one of the cool things I do like is that you are able to upload in certain ones images and say, hey, can you get me what I would like out of this so that I can let students know what this image is actually doing, right? Or what it's showing. So those are all things that help out screen readers, right? Like JAWS and doing alt text for these images. Similarly, what do we do with multilingual students and ESL students? How do we ensure that these systems are available and transparent for that? How do we communicate to students about this? And importantly, I'll put in here for education digital literacy. This is something we deal with, again, constantly, is we are in a digital age for our students. I have a son who is 12 and a daughter who is 7. They're already in a digital age. Everything they do is on a phone, on a laptop, on a iPad, on a computer at school. All their testing is all done digitally, right? They don't really take any test anymore written. So how do we ensure the accessibility of these tools when they're trying to look at this information? All right. So these are some of the things that we talk about in this particular principle. So what I'm going to do here is start with some of the questions, and I'll kind of go from left to right on my screen and then work through this. And again, as I mentioned, if you have any questions or would like our panelists to follow up on a particular item, please feel free to raise your hand or add your question or comment that you'd like them to follow up in the chat. So I'm going to start with Sharon, if you don't mind. The first question is, can you discuss the importance of source transparency and the use of AI in the classroom? And how do we communicate that with our students?
Oh, I'm happy to start. I have so many thoughts about this topic, but I'll try not to monopolize the whole conversation. One thing our students don't realize is that, when they're thinking about, what they're bringing to the classroom, one of their most important assets is their reputation. And so it's really important that they vet their facts carefully. Even though they may see an assignment as something that's sort of low stakes or not very important, vetting those sources is really important, because when they get out onto the job market, they can't say, oops, got that wrong, used the wrong AI tool. That's not going to fly. So sort of giving them the tools to help them really evaluate sources is sometimes a very important first step. So putting on my academic integrity hat for a moment, one thing that really is a sign that they've used a tool like ChatGPT is the sources. So a lot of times when I have a case that seems questionable, I often just go to the sources first because they're often wrong. There's something wonky about them. One pattern I've been noticing a lot lately has been that at the end of the paragraph, you'll see a citation, an in-text citation, and that will be repeated paragraph after paragraph, which is an interesting pattern. And it seems like a lot of times when you actually dive into those sources, many times it's not pointing to the right information that's quoted, or there's something about the actual source, whether it's the author or the title or the URL that it's pointing to, something is incorrect about that. So a lot of times that's a really good tell, at least from my perspective. So giving students sort of the ability to judge the sources. So that might be, having them in the classroom, do an exercise where they're actually like taking a look at some of these sources and fact checking this information, almost giving them like a rubric to use. You could have a discussion about the accuracy of these sources and then give them a rubric to do an assessment on the AI generated output and have them grade it. put them in the teacher role. So there are different ways that you can approach this, but really sort of reinforcing that, even though these tools sound very authoritative, which makes it sound like, oh, this is, it knows better than I do. But then showing them that, okay, it may sound good, and it may sound like, oh, this is like an expert giving me this information. A lot of times there are holes that they can poke through. And they're even finding that, studies have been coming out that show that even when there are exclusive partnerships with certain publishers, that even those sources are incorrect. So even when you have thinking about the training on these models that have given them permission, and it's not questionable as to the copyright issue, a lot of times even those sources are not correct. So helping students really see that, once you take a closer look, you can really poke holes into some of the output that you're generating.
Awesome, thank you, Sharon. And I did put a couple of the ways APA, MLA in Chicago were, kind of require you and the students to cite those sources. So one of the things that we're also seeing in there is that they need to include also, or at least some of the faculty members. I think a smart way to also do this is require them to include the prompt that they got to get that answer is something really, really important to do as well. Nicholas, I'll move over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree very much with a lot of the things that Sharon has said there. And in many ways, kind of source transparency and fact checking may be more important than it's ever been. But to me, a really important question is that as these tools continue to improve all the time, as you said, John, and kind of continue to evolve, is that kind of question of what does source transparency really mean in an AI world? Because I think that definition of source transparency is going to evolve quite quickly, especially because as AI is becoming kind of an embedded part of a lot of the tools that we use on a day-to-day basis. I'll use Copilot in Microsoft Office as an example. Once you're no longer kind of deliberately going through a specific source or going through a separate AI tool, what does source transparency mean? What does source transparency mean when there's just something that's with you all the time that's giving you small nudges or small bits of help? And I think that traditional definition of source transparency just doesn't quite translate perfectly, I think, to kind of the way in which these tools are evolving and are going to be more and more embedded. And there's going to be lots of cases where you're probably not going to be prompting an AI. It's just going to do things around the work that you're doing. And so thinking about how do we update that definition, I think is going to be really important. One of the things that we kind of see in the conversations that we have with students is that students right now, they are looking for very clear expectations. They want to see very clear expectations on what they are allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. And they're not always getting, they're not always finding that clarity of expectations. And so a few really interesting examples that I've seen is institutions, for example, use a traffic light system where basically different assignments will kind of have different traffic lights associated to them, where basically a red light means that really you shouldn't be using any AI tools as part of this. Yellow light means you can have limited use with specific attributions. Green light is you can use it all the way however you like. And that, I think, starts to become, I don't know if that's really a sustainable one, given as these tools become more embedded, but I think that's kind of an interesting one. Another one that I've seen, which comes back to what was said before, is I'm seeing more and more institutions kind of start to use the concept of AI assignments. So these are essentially assignments where students are required to use AI tools as part of the process, and they actually need to document and submit the prompts that they're using as part of that. And actually, part of the grade goes towards the quality of the prompting that they're doing. So that I think is kind of an interesting one to kind of explore and play with. And one last one that I kind of came across kind of a few weeks ago was kind of around what Creative Commons is starting to do. How do you think about kind of source transparency and attribution within the context of an AI world? And they had a proposal there where basically there were some additional things that they are considering adding to the Creative Commons framework, where you can basically express as part of your submission, whether it was kind of fully human generated, whether it was primarily a human that generated it, but with support from an AI, whether it was primarily AI generated, but with overview from a human, or whether it was fully AI generated, and kind of getting students a little bit more fluid, I think, in those different ways of using it, and then different ways of kind of recognizing that source transparency and that origin, I think could be quite interesting. So this is, as I kind of said, I've seen some really interesting approaches towards this and setting clear expectations for students, but ultimately the definition of source transparency is going to have to change if it needs to apply, or if it wants to apply in an AI world.
Awesome. Astrid?
Thank you. In looking at source transparency, I find it very important that your learners understand how the tools work, because I feel that this really creates opportunities for them to both become more effective when using a tool, but also for not allowing a false sense of assurity on the validity of AI responses. So that initial training is incredibly important for them to understand the process, the systematic building of these AI bots, because then that provides those tools for them to be more discerning in how they're using things, the checks and balances that they're putting in place in their own work. I think that part of that source transparency, just like we talked about at the first of this meeting, for those that weren't here when we first started, but for me in my day-to-day use, accessibility with AI begins with our Zoom meetings, and introducing in every meeting that I have all of these different tools turned on. I share what's available, basic instructions, and encourage people to play. Try out the AI companion, ask it different questions, build your prompt engineering skills, and I feel that it's super important to create safe spaces for experimentation and failure, since this is what innovation is born from. At UCI, we have built our own Zot GPT, which for non-UCI people, our mascot is Peter the Anteater, and so we go Zot, Zot, Zot. So Zot GPT is our internal GPT system, using all of the main tools, but it's got the security of being an internal system. Your information is not part of the learning information for the tool, and so it offers some aspects of creating a safe space, for people to try things out and to use things. With that, we've created with that a chart that compares the different supported generative AI solutions that we have at UCI, and the different features, models, security aspects, and examples of how to use these. So again, I really push that the more learning and the more training that can be done up front on how it works on the back end, the better our students will be at using this, and using it safely, and using it in new and powerful ways that maybe you and I have not, even begin to think up.
Awesome. Thanks, Astrid. So if there's any questions or thoughts, thank you for all the thoughts in the chat. We'll move to question 2. So Sharon, we kind of talked about this a little bit. How do you address concerns about the use of AI tools to summarize student content, and what are the implications for academic integrity and student work?
One thing that I've noticed in my work as an academic integrity facilitator is that a lot of the students turn to AI because they don't have confidence in themselves. Some of this is a confidence issue, and they see AI as a way to sort of give them guidance. Sometimes it starts out very innocently, where they are just like, I'm not really sure about this assignment. I'm not really sure I'm on the right track. I'm not a good writer. Writing is not my strong point. I'm going to turn to a tool like ChatGPT and see what it produces. And a lot of times, because it does have that authoritative voice, a lot of times the student is like going, well, that sounds so much better than what I've produced. And I was working with one student last semester, and the confidence issue, I mean, she just really did not have confidence in her own ability. And when she was describing her approach to doing the work on her own before turning to ChatGPT, she was on the right track. And what was really, really awful was that ChatGPT took her in the wrong direction. So not only did she get flagged for an academic integrity violation because the instructor had basically said that, okay, it's not appropriate in this course to use AI tools, but she also didn't even get the assignment right. And if she would have just trusted herself and her abilities and her voice, and saw how important that voice was, she would have probably gotten a fairly decent grade. And I've seen that in many different cases. And so really sort of helping the students recognize the importance of their voice, and understanding that these tools really are just sort of predicting the next word. They're not intelligent, they're not perfect, even though they do sound authoritative, can be important. The other thing that I've noticed too, that sort of is in the lines of academic integrity and the implications for student work, is that a lot of the students are moving from one class to the next with very, very different use policies. So it may range from, it's the Wild West, anything goes type of policy with AI, versus those that say AI is completely banned, and then everything in between. So if you have a student that's moving from, say, 5 different courses, and they're juggling a job and family and personal responsibilities, a lot of times it's like going, okay, I know we talked about this in the very first week of class. What was that policy again? And so one thing that I've been talking with instructors about is, don't be afraid to repeat your policy on multiple occasions, even though you feel like, okay, the students should know this. I've said this so many times, but being very clear about, in this class for this assignment, this is the policy. And this may vary from one assignment to the next. I have one instructor who basically doesn't really want her students to use AI for most of the class, but she has an AI-based paper that's really, really cool and fun. And that gives the students a space to really play around. And it's a very scaffolded type of project. And it's actually really, really cool. But she's got a very selected space that she's identified in the course to make its use permissible. Whereas the other part, she's very clear about, I don't want you to use this, and here are my reasons why. And also explaining the reasons why it's not appropriate in this course or for this activity. A lot of times the students are like, well, my instructor's just being mean. No, there's a pedagogical reason why I'm encouraging you not to use these tools. And I'm using the word encouraging intentionally, because even if you say AI use is banned in this course, I'm sorry, but for many of the students, they're turning to AI. And in many cases, it's ChatGPT. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Sharon. Nicholas, any thoughts?
Yeah, and so if we kind of look at it from the flip side, if we look at it from kind of a faculty member using AI to kind of summarize student content or help them as part of their feedback or grading workflow, I mean, one key I think is that you need to have extremely strong kind of institutional AI policies in place. I think that's really important for us. I mean, one of the very first things that we did is that we kind of tried to put a trustworthy AI framework in place that kind of puts guidelines or defines guidelines that kind of try to make sure that AI is being used in a responsible and in a kind of an ethical way. And for us, kind of one of the key principles within that policy is that you always want a human in control. You always want a human in the middle. And I think that's important for a number of different ways, because it obviously keeps that human control and that human connection, but you also need someone to really own what's happening and ultimately bear responsibility for what's happening. And so in the case of an instructor, for example, using AI tools to summarize student content, sometimes that may be very appropriate. Sometimes that may not be appropriate, and it ultimately the instructor needs to be the one that's responsible for deciding whether or not that's an appropriate use of AI. And so one of the things that's been really interesting, and this is fairly recent, I think, but it kind of over the last several months that we've started to kind of see come out in student interviews, is that we are starting to see a little bit of pushback from students on kind of certain types of usage of or certain types of instructor usage of AI. And this has evolved quickly, where 2 years ago, students were much further ahead in their adoption and they were asking for more of it to be incorporated in the classroom. Now we're seeing some examples where students are pushing back. And so one example where we've seen a lot of pushback from students is when instructors or faculty start to use AI to, for example, automatically grade student work or automatically provide feedback to student work. A lot of students find that to kind of go a little bit too far, and actually they think this is part of the value of the I guess the education they're signing up for, is that kind of human connection and that human feedback. So again, I think it's really important to kind of think about what is that right balance where AI can be used appropriately and what kind of crosses that line. And to me, the parallel with YouTube, for example, is really interesting, where YouTube for years has had pretty much all of the content that we teach at our institutions. There's very little that's not out there already, but students still go to school, and that's because of that human connection, being part of a cohort, et cetera. So that's that kind of policy piece, I think, is really important. One last thing, though, is that, and this comes back to the previous question, is that I think we need to continue to ask the question, what does an academic integrity really mean in an AI world where AI is essentially creating new things? It can't be detected reliably. It increasingly is becoming embedded in the tools that we use. So what does academic integrity really mean? And actually, we see this, one of the things that we see come up in student surveys is issue number 1 and issue number 2 that we see in student surveys is all to do with mental health and anxiety. And actually, one of the drivers of AI, of that anxiety is actually around AI. If you dig into the comments, and that kind of the fear of being incorrectly accused of using AI or not using AI as expected is a real thing with students right now. And so it's important that and I think, Sharon, this is ultimately what I think you were describing in your role as well. It ultimately comes down to kind of redefining our assessment practices, making them more authentic in nature, making them more AI robust, that will actually steal that line from you. I really like that. And I think that's ultimately how we get to a better place, rather than trying to prevent students from using it in the first place. So I think it kind of varies a little bit depending on kind of what type of usage you're looking at, but I think that human in control, that human in the middle, and a really strong policy is ultimately going to be really important here.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to move to question 3, and I'll start with Astrid. So, getting to kind of one of the central themes that we've been dealing with is, how do we, again, talk to students about the potential bias in some of these tools, and again, critically evaluating this content that's coming out. Because again, it's, where are they getting the data from? How are each of these models trained, and how are they critically evaluating? Because as Sharon and you guys have already pointed out, that some of the stuff, when the AI is very good at making it sound awesome. Like, this is canonical. This is absolutely correct. There's no way this is incorrect. So how do we teach them about critically evaluating, and then the potential bias involved in that? Astrid?
I'm so glad you brought this question to me. This is an area that I'm extremely passionate about. I was very fortunate while I was at UCLA, sorry, to work with a scholar that has a book now called The Algorithms of Oppression. And she was brilliant, and talking with her introduced me many, many years ago into the bias that can be built into all of this, and the importance of making sure that you're planting those seeds with your learners, with students, with faculty and staff, on how the data is collected, how the data is being used, what training models are being used to put these things together. There are so many studies that have taken place in the recent past. People, I think, are starting to be more aware of the biases that are possible, but studies on minority groups or issues, in equity, that the data that they were using within the study was collected in a very biased way and wasn't really supporting what these groups were trying to do. They had great intentions, but they didn't understand that the data wasn't supporting their goals and wasn't getting them to the conclusions that were needed. So that is huge. Another incredible individual within this sphere is Joy Buolamwini. She has done something called the coded gaze, unmasking algorithmic bias. And her study is fascinating because it wasn't what she was initially working on, but she discovered that facial recognition software, she was working on doing some gaming coding and things like that, but realized that her very dark skin was not being recognized by the facial recognition software that was out there. And so I don't know if you guys ever have used those white plastic mask from like Michael's that you can decorate, and your kids can glue things on and all of that. But those masks, I personally think, are quite scary looking, but she could put on one of those masks and the facial recognition software would recognize her, but her own face, it would not recognize, because all of that facial recognition software was trained on non-minority data. So this is such a critical area that we want to make sure that our students are aware of. I actually, my student employee, and I have now a staff member on our team that was a former student employee, but I presented these questions to them and asked them their thoughts and to provide some student voice. UCI is a Hispanic serving institution. We have a I think this past spring, our undergraduate class percentage of first generation students was just under 50%. So these are the kind of students that we need to be, really creating these safe spaces for them to use these tools. Because again, innovation is born out of mistakes and errors being made and roadblocks. But to get that other perspective involved in this whole process, and it goes back to, model explainability and open source coding. These are some of the aspects that AI users should seek out prior to, interacting with new AI. And then providing training on, again, the data collection, the algorithmic and processing transparency, and outputs can provide learners of any age the skills necessary to navigate 21st century technology and to be aware of all of those possibilities and how all of it is built, again, being that key thing that, if we provide learners with the skills to fish, while consistently emphasizing the importance of individual voice and perspective and how we address these issues, academic integrity, confidence, like Sharon was talking about, a lack of confidence, we can build all of these things and they become the goal. Being proud of their own voice becomes the goal and not an unattainable distinction. And when you build those things and create prompt engineers with unique voices, then they're going to be more focused on making sure that the response that they get back works for them, that it presents their ideas in the way that they want it done.
Awesome. Thank you, Astrid. And I think one of the things critically, as you point out, also is this is really going to be important when it comes to the medical space as well, because that's a significant problem that we're running into. I know we're running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to ask Sharon to do a quick comment on question 3, then I'll move to Nicholas for question 4.
Yeah, so to be brief, I'm going to share an example of a student activity that worked really, really well with an instructor that I've been working with. So we basically sort of asked the students to have an AI tool like ChatGPT write a biography about them, like a bio, just a quick bio about themselves. And the student in the prompt provided information like, I am a 20-year-old undergraduate in this major, and I come from this town in this particular state, and I'm first gen, or just a few key details about themselves. And it's interesting because many times what is generated, the AI tool will often make assumptions based on, say, the town that you're from. So many of the students who are from smaller communities found that some of the information was actually like, oh, I can see that you have a bias against people from small communities, and you're making these assumptions about everyone who lives in maybe these small communities or rural community or even an urban area. So a lot of times an exercise like that can really show them like, oh, wait a minute, that's not me. And personalizing it and showing them how a tool like ChatGPT can really provide them information that's incorrect even about themselves can be one of those aha moments.
Awesome. Thank you, Sharon. So we'll move to question 4 briefly. And Nicholas, so what are some professional development opportunities that you guys are recommending for instructors to develop skills on using AI effectively in the classroom?
Yeah, and it almost comes back to what Sharon was just saying. And I actually really like the exercise that she was describing. And it comes back to ultimately the best way to kind of increase your fluency from an AI perspective is really to try it and play with it and experience it and kind of take it one step at a time. So my big recommendation would be pick a small step, pick something, try it, play with it, actually involve students in that process as well, get their feedback, be transparent in kind of how you're using it, kind of get their feedback on how they like it, whether they think it kind of improves things or not, and just kind of see what works and doesn't work. I'm a huge proponent of just taking a very experimental approach. And often what we see when instructors kind of take that step by step, let's just try it and kind of learn from that and see what happens, is that it becomes less scary for them as part of that process. And they start to better understand kind of how it enhances their work, but also start to feel a little less threatened by AI. So I think try it. I think there's lots of kind of more formal professional development opportunities out there. One that I'll just throw out there just in case anyone's interested. We've also developed a 5-module course on the responsible use of AI within the context of education specifically. We can offer that to all of you free of charge. So if anyone's interested in that, maybe we could make that part of the follow-up and just give you the link of where you can find that. But it's a really good course, got some really good content, some really interesting exercises. So if anyone's interested, more than happy to make that available.
Awesome. Astrid, did you want to just take a minute or two to respond?
I would love to. At UCI, we have a data and digital literacy certificate program for faculty, staff at no cost to learners, based on the principle that if we want to increase our students' digital literacy, every touch point across campus needs to increase their data and digital literacy, so we can incorporate the teachings into everything we're doing. So it's not just a training session, it's incorporating it into all of the processes and talking about all of that. I'm very excited to announce that my MAPS program was just selected as an EDUCAUSE exemplar for the 2025 Horizon Report. And I'm creating it in such a way that it can be a template for other organizations. We've done this, we're using Udemy, we're using Canvas, and we've created it in such a way so it's no cost to our learners. And it has role-specific learning paths and is teaching about all of the tools that we use at UCI. But also, there's a lot of course built in into each of the tracks about AI, because that's what everybody's thinking about right now. And, we also have our ZotGPT trainings, and our IT team has created this incredible prompt dashboard, but it's really creating these tools. And as well, we now have a collaboration with Microsoft 365 and we've had in-person trainings at their suite in Irvine. We're having cross-campus co-pilot trainings with their incredible team, and they're sending out the best of the best. I've been incredibly, as a longtime Mac person, I've been incredibly impressed with their team and all that they're bringing to our campus. So, for me, everything that we can do to teach more and again, like Sharon so eloquently discussed, creating that confidence, creating citizen data scientists that are thoughtful in what they're doing and how they're achieving their goals. I think that's huge. So the professional development aspects are massive. And, Nicholas, thank you for offering that, because I plan to totally go check it out.
Well, thank you, everybody. So as a reminder, next month, we will have a principal panel on generative AI principle 5, which is about safety, security, and privacy, which is, as you can imagine, is a very interesting topic related to this aspect. So please feel free to be on the lookout for that. And I'll leave, we have a couple minutes left. So if anybody has any questions or thoughts, please feel free to put those in the chat or raise your hand and unmute yourself. We'll be happy to discuss that. But I want to thank everybody, thank the panelists for their time today. And I'll give a couple minutes back if anybody has any questions. We'll stay on the call. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Astrid, for putting those links in the chat as well. Any questions?
Thank you, John, for coordinating all of this and for all your work over this past year in creating the structure for what these different talks are covering. I've been following that as part of the teaching and learning subcommittee. So excellent work and an excellent panel.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we're hoping that as these things are progressing, we're we're working on a principal 6 and maybe even a 7 as some of these things are coming about. All right, well, thank you, everybody. And we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Are you still on here? No, Bart. Hey, Bart, can you give me 1 second?
Yeah, certainly can.
Ask you to turn on the AI companion. Now I want my notes really quickly. Or is it going to let me? No, it won't let me. Okay.
Here, 1 second. Let me see. I'm guessing.
No, what it probably did and how you probably have it set up is by turning it on, it will create the post-meeting notes, the summary. But it didn't turn on the in-meeting questions, which I really think that that's something that you guys should look into doing. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool. I'm able to get so much out of that and provide so much back to the other attendees of meetings. I'm able to provide great notes right afterwards, but also I can have it because I can ask those questions within the meeting. I can really have it get into detail on certain items that came up. And when Tom was talking about this, provide all the details around it,
Right.
whereas that overall summary won't do that.